So hi, welcome everyone. My name is Dan McCrae. I'm the Director of Academic Support there. And we're going to talk tonight about something called mindset, which is based on the work of a psychologist named Carol Dweck. It's really kind of taken off probably in the last 10 years or so in psychology. It's kind of a hot area for research, and there's been a lot of stuff written on it and a lot of new research that's gone into it that I'm going to share with you tonight. And I think, one of the reasons I think it's so important is because I think it can really be a helpful thing for students to be aware of their mindsets, and also to make sure that they have kind of a productive and an adaptive mindset for school and different areas. Hold on one second. Oh, I think someone might be joining us by the phone. Okay, hold on. I wasn't sure what was going on there. Okay, so we're going to talk about mindset. And before we get started, I thought it'd be nice to just kind of start off with a couple questions just to kind of get us thinking about mindsets. So the first question I want to ask people, and you don't have to answer this yet, if you just want to jot down what you think the answer is to this question, we'll come back to it towards the end of the workshop. So this question is basically asking you, when do you think the brain stops growing? Is it when you're an infant, when you're 23, 42, or 53 years old? So just jot down your answer, and we'll come back to this towards the end. Okay. So if the people, the teleconference, anyone joining us by teleconference, welcome to the workshop. But if you could, if it's possible to mute your phone until you have a question or comment, that'd be really helpful. Okay, so I see a few answers down there, and that's great. You can answer if you'd like, but really we're going to come back to this towards the end. I just kind of want to get an idea of what you think towards the end of the workshop. Just think about this, though, while we go through it. Okay, the next question, and these are kind of questions just to kind of get your opinions about these things. There's no right or wrong answer. And if you just want to raise your hand if you agree with one or the other, the little hand icon up here right above the chat window, click on that to raise your hand. So how many people here believe that great basketball players are born great? You're born a great basketball player. Raise your hand. Okay, nobody. Okay, how many people believe that great basketball players are made great? Okay. Okay, excellent. All right, so most of you think that they're made great. Excellent. Okay, so the next question, are great artists born? Raise your hand if you believe that great artists are born. And you can just click on the hand icon again to lower your hand if you don't want your hand raised. Okay, so a couple people believe that great artists are born great. So how many people believe great artists are made great? Okay, excellent. So almost everybody. Okay, cool. All right, next question. How many people believe that great businessmen are born? Okay, so a few of you do. All right. Okay. How many people believe that great businessmen are made? Okay. Cool. And I noticed a few people have their hands raised for both, and that's perfectly fine. You can think that it's a little bit of both. That's good. All right, excellent. So I think this is second to the last question. How many people believe great carpenters are born great? Okay, how many? Okay, one person. Okay, good. What about carpenters are made great? Okay. All right, cool. Now, final question. How many people believe great students are born great? Yeah, great students are born great. Okay. How many people believe great students are made great? Excellent. Okay, so what you guys just did was a quick version of the mindset quiz, and this is actually Carol Dweck's website. She's the psychologist who started most of this work, and you can go to her website and you can take the online quiz there, and it goes into a little bit more detail, but based on most of your answers, thanks Lisa, based on most of your answers, it seems that most of you probably have a growth mindset, which is really great, and we'll find out more what that means in a few minutes. But what Carol Dweck found is that we have different mindsets, and so for Carol Dweck, a mindset is just another word for a belief. So we have different beliefs about a whole bunch of different areas. So we might have one kind of mindset about school and a different kind of mindset about sports. They've even found that we have mindsets about our emotions and our willpower, and that we can even have mindsets about relationships. So our mindsets kind of goes into a whole bunch of different areas, and we can actually have like conflicting mindsets about different areas. So that's one of the reasons why I think mindsets are so important, because most of the time when we operate, when we're going through life, our mindsets are like invisible to us. We don't even realize that we have a mindset. We don't realize that we're making predictions and interpretations. We just kind of think that we're acting as we normally act. And that can kind of lead to problems if your mindset isn't a very helpful mindset. So that's why it's important to become aware of this stuff. So, like I said, Carol Dweck is the psychologist who started a lot of the work into mindsets. And so she was getting her PhD at Columbia University. This was about 30 years ago when she started doing her work. And she started doing work on how students cope with failure. That was her research question. And she actually came up with a pretty neat experiment to see how students cope with failure and also how they looked at challenges. And so what she did was she had, I think these were I think they were fourth graders she started working with. They were in elementary school. And what she did was she had two groups of puzzles. And so one set of puzzles were really easy. And the students were told that those puzzles were really easy. And then the other set of puzzles were more difficult. And after you solved one puzzle and would go on to the next puzzle, that one would be more difficult than the last one. So each puzzle you solved, the one after that became more and more difficult. And so she just let the students go into the room. A whole bunch of them went into the room, and she said, just go in and solve whatever puzzle you want to. It's totally up to you. You can solve as many as you want. You can solve easy puzzles, hard puzzles, whatever you want to do. And so she found that some of the students would go in and they would immediately start working on the easy puzzles, and instead of going from the easy puzzles to the more difficult puzzles, they would just continue working on the easy puzzles, and they would never leave that category of puzzles. They would just keep working on the easy puzzles, and they'd solve one easy puzzle and then go on to another easy puzzle. Another group of students, though, would go right to the difficult puzzles. They skip right over the easy puzzles, and they'd go to the difficult puzzles, and they would solve one puzzle, and then they'd go on to the next puzzle that was more difficult. And instead of seeming frustrated and, hold on one sec. Automatic light, annoying. But so anyways, they would solve the difficult puzzles, and instead of being kind of frustrated that they weren't, and a lot of times they weren't able to solve one of the hard puzzles, but instead of being frustrated, they would keep working on it, and they seemed happy, and they would say things like, boy, I was hoping this was going to be informative today. And some of the students would say, while they were working on the difficult puzzles, I love challenges. I love working on challenges. And so that kind of, the different responses to those puzzles really made Carol Dweck kind of wonder what was going on, what made one group of students just focus on the easy puzzles and another group of students just continue to work on more and more difficult puzzles. So she did more and more research, and she found out that one of the main differences between those two groups of people, those groups of students, was their their mindsets. And so a mindset is just another word, like I said, it's another word for a belief. And she found that the students who worked only on the easy puzzles, those students tended to have what's called a fixed mindset. And that's where they believe that ability, talent, intelligence, all those kind of inner qualities that we have, they're fixed and they can't be changed. So basically, kind of in their minds, they were probably thinking, you know, I'm probably not good at solving puzzles. I probably don't have that gift, so I'm just going to solve these easy puzzles because I don't have a puzzle-solving talent. You know, so that's kind of the thought process that people with a fixed mindset would have. The other group, the group of students who worked on the difficult puzzles, they tended to have what's called a growth mindset, and that's where they believe that ability, talent, and intelligence, all those things can be grown and developed. And even if you're not born a great puzzle solver, if you work hard at it and you don't give up and you challenge yourself, you can learn to become a better puzzle solver. So that's the two different mindsets. And as you can see, they're probably the consequences of those beliefs can be quite dramatic in the difference between those two consequences. So, you know, one group will just not even bother trying to get better at it, while another group will continually work harder and challenge themselves in order to get better at it. So are there any questions out there? Just want to check before we go on. Between the growth and the fixed mindsets or anything else I said? Okay. All right, so we're going to move on. So this is just a summary of the fixed mindset. And so this is the mindset that the students had who just worked on the easy puzzles. People with this kind of mindset or these types of beliefs believe that intelligence, and you could, you could put in talent or ability or, willpower or even personality in there. Any of those inner qualities, they're static and they don't change. Yeah, go ahead, Julia. Did you have a question, Julia? Oh, okay, I think you're typing. Okay. So I think what you're going to ask is, can a person have both mindsets? And the answer to that question is yes. And actually, it's quite common to have, both mindsets. So yeah, I think most of the time, we're going to, tonight, later on, we're going to talk about different examples, and the examples are, I use kind of extreme examples just because it makes it easier to see the differences. But yeah, most people have a little bit of both, and and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's just the way, usually we get our mindsets from our upbringing and from our parents and our family and friends. So we tend to have a little bit of mixed mindsets. And, normally that's not really a big deal. The problem happens when we run into things like challenges or obstacles, or if we have, like, let's say we get a bad grade on a test. What happens is when we have a little bit of those both mindsets, we kind of default to that fixed mindset, almost as a defense mechanism, like. And so I got a great story that kind of explains this. So about 10 years ago, I took a class on computer programming. It was at a community college, and I was just doing it because I was interested. It wasn't like I wanted to do it as a career. I was just interested in this, and so I decided to take this class on computer programming. And there were 30 people in the class, and after the first couple weeks, it became apparent that there was one student in the class who was just really good at computer programming. And it just seemed to me like I just assumed that he was a natural. The way he thought and the way he talked about computer programming, you could just tell that he was really good at this, and it just kind of came naturally to him. So for me, this was my first computer programming class, so it was all new. A lot of the stuff was new to me, and it was quite difficult. And I got through to the end of the class and actually, made it through the class, but on the day of the final, there were only 3 of us left in this class on the day of the final, and one of the students was that student that I thought was just a natural programmer. So after the final was done, we were out in the hallway and we were talking, and I was like, that was a really hard final for me. What did you think? And he's like, I thought it wasn't too bad. And I'm like, wow, you know, I go, how did you become such a good programmer? I mean, it's really obvious that you have a gift for this. And he goes, oh no, I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm a professional programmer. That's my job. You know, my job is paying for me to come to take this class because they want me to learn Visual Basic. And so that's kind of how our mindsets work. Like, we just kind of assume sometimes that people are either gifted or not gifted. But, you know, this guy had been doing programming for 20 years, and that's why he was so good at it. So, you know, sometimes our mindsets, even though, you know, we have a little bit of both, in some situations they can kind of lead us to inaccurate predictions or inaccurate judgments. And so that's why it's important to kind of become aware of our mindsets and to kind of make sure that we stay in a productive or a helpful mindset. And we'll talk more about that and how you do that as we go along. But that story just kind of illustrates how, and at this point when I took this class, I had known about mindsets. I'd already done a couple workshops on mindset, so it wasn't like I didn't know. I knew better, but I still kind of defaulted to that fixed mindset when I was faced with that kind of situation. So that's kind of how our mindsets can kind of get us in trouble sometimes. So when you have a fixed mindset, it leads to what are called performance goals. And so performance goals are where you are just worried about basically how you look to other people. So, you know, have you ever been in a class and you haven't wanted to raise your hand because you didn't want to say the wrong answer? That's a performance goal. You know, you're worried that you're going to look not smart in front of all these other people. And when you have a fixed mindset, that's kind of like your default goal. That's the kind of goal that you have. You're only concerned about looking smart, and if you achieve that goal of looking smart, then you're good. You're fine. The problem with those kinds of goals and that kind of mindset is that when you have that mindset and those goals, you tend to avoid challenges because you don't want to fail in front of other people and look like you're not smart or talented. So you avoid challenges. When faced with hard work or obstacles, people with a fixed mindset tend to give up easy. They just believe that, you know, they don't have that natural gift, and so all the work in the world isn't going to help me, you know, get better at it, so I'm just not going to bother trying. They also see effort or work as really not, it doesn't really help you. You know, working a lot and trying hard doesn't really help because it doesn't really make a difference, because either, you know, you're born great at it or you're not. And so, and this is for people who have an extreme fixed mindset. Also, one other thing, and this is important I think for students and for athletes, but people who have a fixed mindset tend to ignore criticism and feedback. And even if it's really gentle, helpful feedback, people with a fixed mindset tend to take that as an insult. And so you might be trying to help somebody and, you know, say, you know, maybe if you try it this way, it might help. And they come back at you and say, you know, mind your own business, or stay, you know, I don't need your help. You know, that kind of response. That's usually a pretty good indication that someone has a fixed mindset, because to them, criticism isn't just feedback. It's like an attack on you. It's an attack on that person. And actually, Carol Dweck has done research on this, where they would purposely give people very harsh criticism. And these are students, and there was criticism on an essay that they wrote. And they all got really, really harsh criticism. And the people with the fixed mindset immediately discounted what the person said and just said, you know, that person's a jerk. I'm not going to listen to them. I don't care what they have to say. The people with the growth mindset, though, they also thought the person was a jerk. You know, they would say things like, you know, that guy was kind of a jerk, but he said one thing that made sense to me. And so even really harsh criticism, if you have a growth mindset, that kind of information is important to you, because that's how you become better and that's how you change and grow. Yes, Julia, go ahead. How can you tell what kind of mindset you have? Yeah. Okay, so that's a great question. And yeah, so one of the ways is by going to the website that I shared with you at the beginning and taking the mindset quiz. But basically, it kind of boils down to when you think about intelligence and you think about talent and ability, do you think that you're kind of stuck with what you have and you can't really do much to change that, or do you think that you can change and grow and develop? And the answers to those two questions are going to kind of tell you what kind of mindset you have. And it's almost more important to be aware of your mindset than it is to know what mindset you're in all the time, because our mindsets will change. It's like when it's kind of in flux sometimes. And the more important thing is to kind of catch yourself in your responses to either a challenge or a difficult situation or a bad grade. Kind of catch yourself and listen to the kind of thoughts that you're having. And we'll talk more about that and go into more detail about how you do that. But your response to things and the kind of inner messages you tell yourself are going to give you an idea of what kind of mindset you have. And I'll also talk about how to make sure that you can stay in a growth mindset. So we'll get to that. So that's a great question, though. So another thing with a fixed mindset, when people have a fixed mindset, they also tend to shy away from other people who are successful because they're kind of afraid that they're going to be shown up by someone who's successful or that they'll be exposed as not being smart or talented or having a skill. So they tend to shy away from people who are really successful. And because of all these beliefs and these attitudes and the behaviors that they have, people with a fixed mindset, they tend not to live up to their potential. So they kind of, even if they're really talented, they might achieve some success, but then they're going to kind of level off and plateau, and they won't kind of live up to their potential. And I think you can see this a lot really easy with athletes. Sometimes you see an athlete who's really talented, and you think to yourself, well, I wonder why they're not more successful. And a lot of times, it has to do with how they respond to setbacks and challenges, and what kind of mindset they have, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. And so all these beliefs, they confirm for a fixed mindset a deterministic view of the world. And basically what that means is you think that your actions won't make a difference. So why bother studying for an extra half hour? Either I know this stuff or I don't know it. Studying for an extra hour isn't going to make a difference. So that's kind of a deterministic view. It's also like a defeatist view of how the world works and how human nature kind of operates. So that's the fixed mindset. So I want to share a really great example of someone who has an extreme fixed mindset. And I actually had the unfortunate experience of sharing this example in a workshop where there was like the biggest John McEnroe fan in the world. So I just want to say from the beginning that I think John McEnroe is a great tennis player, but he also is someone who has an extreme fixed mindset. So and this is from Carol Dweck's book. She talks about John McEnroe and some other athletes. And like I said earlier, sports is a great kind of opportunity to see people's mindsets because it's such a public thing. You can tell pretty easily and pretty quickly what kind of mindset an athlete has just by the way that they react to things when things don't go well. And you can see what kind of mindset they have. So John McEnroe, he was like the #1 tennis player in the world back in the 70s and part of the 80s. Very talented. He really was a great tennis player, but he also thought that he was so talented and that he was so good that he didn't have to practice. And he actually looked down on other tennis players who did practice. So in his mind, if you had to work at tennis, then that meant that you weren't a great tennis player. So he kind of thought that he was great and he should be treated as a great tennis player. And when a call went against him on the tennis court, either he made a mistake or maybe the judge made a mistake and made a bad call, he would just go ballistic and have these huge temper tantrums. And he was almost more famous for the temper tantrums he would have on the tennis courts than he was for his tennis. And when things didn't go his way, the reaction he had was he would just give up. So I'll give you a quick example. I think it was 1978. He was, he was already one of the top tennis players in the world at this point, and he was invited to play a mixed doubles tournament at Wimbledon. And he had never done a mixed doubles tournament before. This was the first time he did it. And so him and a partner played against 2 other people. And in the tournament, he lost every game. And afterwards, when they interviewed him, he said it was the ultimate embarrassment, and he would never do that again. And so for the next 20 years, he never played a mixed doubles tournament again. So his response to failure in that situation was, if I can't do it perfect the first time, then I'm not even going to bother trying. And so that affected what he played for the next 20 years. That one bad experience kind of determined for him the trajectory of his career for the next 20 years. And so that's what I mean when I say that our mindsets can have really negative effects on on how we react to bad, hard situations. So for John McEnroe, that was a serious. It really kind of led him to not be as good as he could have been. And he actually, after he retired from tennis, he actually admitted that he didn't live up to his potential and that he should have practiced more. He probably could have responded to situations like that mixed doubles tournament in a much better way and become a better tennis player. So that's how a fixed mindset can really hurt us when we run into difficult situations. So what I want you to do now is take 1 or 2 minutes and just see if you can think about someone that you know who's in a fixed mindset, and think about if they're trying to prove themselves, think about if they're sensitive to suggestions or feedback, and using what you know about the fixed mindset, think about why do you think they are that way? What led to that fixed mindset? And just take maybe a couple minutes and see if you can think of someone, and then we'll see if anyone wants to share in a couple seconds. But in the meantime, this is also a good chance if anyone else has questions or comments about the mindsets, this is a good chance to talk about that. Okay. So Sue is saying down in the chat box that she feels that fixed mindsets are a result of lack of confidence and or fear. Okay. Yep. I think you're onto something there, Sue. But I think what Carol Dweck would say is that actually the lack of confidence a lot of times comes from the fixed mindset, and so by changing your mindsets, you can actually change your confidence. And we'll talk about the growth mindset in just a few minutes and what that means. But you're definitely on to something. I think they're both connected. And I think fear of failure kind of is part of that. And that's something that definitely is related to this. So Connie's saying that they're always willing to take the easy way out and don't accept responsibility for their actions. Yep, absolutely. That's definitely I think a trait of someone with an extreme fixed mindset. Okay, so Lisa, you think that you have a fixed mindset and has to do with your childhood and perfectionism? Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think you're definitely. I think our mindsets come from our upbringing and from our parents. Usually, I think that's probably the most direct and the most powerful cause of our mindsets. And I think it is definitely connected to perfectionism and needing to get things exactly right. So yeah, I think you're right on the money, Lisa. That's a good observation. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the growth mindset. So Maggie's saying that she knew someone who was always trying to prove themselves. They're defensive. Even though they would say that they would accept the criticism, they're angry. Okay, yep, absolutely. One of the funny things that I've noticed, I've done probably hundreds of these workshops, and a lot of times I find that the people that we talk about with fixed mindsets tend to be our brothers or sisters, our siblings, and I think that definitely is kind of funny sometimes, but that seems to happen quite often. And yeah, childhood is definitely one of the areas where we get our mindsets. Yeah, and it's a way to try and feel superior. Like if you, I think Katie is saying, or Katia, I'm sorry, was saying that it's a way to help them feel superior, and that's definitely true. I think sometimes it's comfortable to think, oh, maybe I have a gift for this. You know, maybe this is just something I'm naturally born to be good at. And that does make you feel kind of superior and secure. The problem is, though, that you're always kind of worried that you're going to be exposed, and that if you make a mistake, that's going to be proof that you're not good at that thing, or you're not naturally gifted at it. And so people with a fixed mindset can kind of hold back and not challenge themselves. Yeah, I think John is saying that he believes that people are a result of their environments unless they choose not to be. And I think there's definitely a lot of truth in that. I think what most researchers would say is that we have both influences, you know, genetics and upbringing, both have a part of what kind of a mindset and what kind of talents and skills we have. And I think what Carol Dweck would say, and a lot of the research backs up what she would say, is that a lot of times we overestimate, though, how important genetics and our natural abilities are, and that actually the beliefs and how hard we work and our environment can have a much more powerful effect than we usually believe. So, and we're going to talk more about that as we go along. But those are all great comments, everybody. And thanks for sharing. I think that's some good stuff and good observations. But I do want to get moving on because we're at over the halfway point. So there's some really important stuff to learn about growth mindset. So we've learned about the fixed mindset and kind of the difficulties and the problems that having a fixed mindset can lead to. And now we're going to learn about the growth mindset. And I just want to say one other thing because I think I'm one of those people that have a fixed mindset all through high school, middle school. I didn't have a mixture of the growth and the mixed or fixed. I was definitely all the way over on the fixed side. And so these aren't, I don't want people to kind of get hung up and think that a growth mindset is good and a fixed mindset is bad. It's not like a moral judgment. It's just a way of describing our beliefs, and the consequences of those beliefs are what leads to problems. So it's not the belief, having a fixed mindset doesn't mean that you're not a good student or not a good person. It just means that, you need to be careful and kind of become aware of your mindsets and your beliefs so that your mindset doesn't get you into trouble. And so I just want to throw that caveat out there before we go any further. So people with a growth mindset, they tend to believe that intelligence can be developed, and you could, like I said before, you could substitute talent, ability, willpower, emotions, any kind of inner quality we have. Those things can be developed, and we can improve on them. That's the kind of the essence of a growth mindset. And it doesn't matter what you are born with. If you work hard and you don't give up and you challenge yourself and you surround yourself with people who've been successful in the past, then that will help you become smarter and more skilled and more talented. So that's kind of the essence of the growth mindset. And when you have a growth mindset, instead of having those performance goals that I talked about with the fixed mindset, when you have a growth mindset, you have what are called learning goals. So you don't care how you appear to other people. You don't care if you raise your hand and you make a wrong answer in class. If you learn something from that situation, even if you said the wrong answer, if you learn something, then you've achieved your goal. And so that leads to very different outcomes than having a performance goal. And so people with, especially people with extreme growth mindsets, they have very strong learning goals, and that's really the only thing they're concerned with. I would say that, you know, they might have some concern about their grades, but that's not the number one thing. The number one thing for someone with the growth mindset is, are they learning something? And if they're learning something, then they're achieving their goals. So that's an important distinction between the two mindsets. Also, when you have a growth mindset, you tend to embrace challenges because you know that the way that you learn, the way that you grow is by challenging yourself. And if you always choose the safe option and the guaranteed success, then you're not really going to grow and you're not going to learn. So people with a growth mindset, they embrace challenges, they select challenging situations to help them grow and learn. They also persist when things get difficult, so they don't let obstacles stop them. One other really important piece of research that Carol Dweck found out about people with the growth mindset that has to do directly with college students is that when someone with a growth mindset is, let's say they're studying biology and they're using one, let's say that they're reading the chapter and they've reread the chapter 2 or 3 times and it's just not sinking in. Well, instead of continuing to try and reread that chapter, they're going to try another strategy. So they're always looking for new strategies and willing to try different ways to learn something. They don't stick with just one thing. They try to find alternative strategies in order to learn better. So that's also an important finding. Is so when you're faced with a situation where it seems like no matter how hard you work, you're just not getting it. Think about changing what you're doing in terms of your studying. Like maybe you can try flashcards, or maybe you can try quizzing yourself, or some other strategy, or listening to a lecture, or watching a movie. Maybe depending on your learning style. The important thing is that you don't just stick with one strategy. Try different strategies. When you have a growth mindset, you also see effort as the way that you become smarter, and the way that you master a subject is through hard work and effort. If it comes naturally or easy to you without any work, then you're probably, someone with a growth mindset will probably think that they're not challenging themselves enough. And so working hard and trying hard is how you become skilled and talented. They also pay attention to criticism. They try to learn from criticism, even if they feel like it might be unfair criticism. They try to find the grain of truth in the criticism that they can learn from. They also try to learn from people who have been successful in the past. So they'll look for mentors and role models who've been down that road before and have been successful, because they want to try and learn from those people and see, what are the things that they can learn from that person that will help them in whatever it is they're doing. So as a result of all these beliefs and behaviors, they reach higher levels of development than someone with a fixed mindset. And all of these things also gives them a greater sense of free will, where they think that their actions do make a difference, and by studying harder and putting in more effort and more time, that they can actually become better at whatever it is that they're trying to learn. So that's just a summary of the growth mindset. And so Michael Jordan is kind of a really great example of someone with an extreme growth mindset. And Carol Dweck talks in her book a lot about Michael Jordan as well. And so Michael Jordan, he, today we think about Michael Jordan, and the reason I use Michael Jordan and John McEnroe is that I think they're really good kind of polar opposites of each other, and especially in the ways that they kind of, their responses to failure and setbacks. I think it's really kind of clear how their mindsets affected each one of them. And so Michael Jordan, his mindset came from his parents. And so when we think about Michael Jordan, we think about, he was the greatest basketball player in history. But what a lot of people don't know is that he was actually cut from his high school basketball team. So when he was a senior in high school, the coach cut him from the basketball team. And so a lot of people don't know that. And when they find that out, they're kind of shocked. And I was shocked when I found that out, because it just doesn't make sense to us, because we all assume that Michael Jordan was a natural basketball player. He was just talented. He was probably always great. He was probably slam dunking the basketball when he was like in 6th grade or something. And what we find out when I read about Michael Jordan, when Carol Dweck talked about him in her book, That's not the case. He was, he was a good basketball player, but he also got cut from the team in high school. And then when he went to college, the college of his first choice, they didn't want him for his team. They didn't think that he was good enough. So the college he went to was actually his second choice. And he went to that college and he did really well in basketball. People could tell that he was going to be a great basketball player. They didn't think that he was going to be the greatest basketball player ever, but a lot of people could tell that he was really good. And so he was good enough to get into the pros, but when he got into the pros, the first two teams that could draft him, they passed on Michael Jordan. I think it was the Knicks and the Lakers. Both had a chance to get to Michael Jordan before the Bulls did, but both of those teams passed on him. And so today, we hear about that, and it just doesn't make sense to us. But when you hear how Michael Jordan's parents kind of helped him develop a growth mindset, the way he developed, I think, makes more sense. So when he got cut from his high school basketball team, he went home and he told his mom what happened. And instead of trying to comfort him, his mom said, well, the problem is you're not working hard enough. You're not practicing enough. You need to get out there, you need to get more disciplined, and you need to practice more. So that was her response to his failure. And that was kind of how he was raised throughout his whole life. And then years later, after Michael Jordan had led the Bulls to 3 championships, and he was world famous, and everybody knew Michael Jordan, and they knew that he was definitely one of the greatest basketball players in history, he was talking to his dad one day, and his dad said, it's great that you're the greatest basketball player in history, but it'd be even better if you were the greatest baseball player in history too. So his dad, it wasn't enough for his dad that his son was the greatest basketball player ever. He also wanted his son to try this other thing and become great at baseball as well. So that's a really good kind of illustration of how their mindsets kind of influenced Michael Jordan. So go ahead, Julia. Do you have a question?
Yes. You mentioned that Michael Jordan, his mom had given him suggestions. Does your mindset, just like the type of environment you grow up in, kind of shape your mindset in a way when you're a kid?
I think I heard you. Did you say, does your environment affect your mindset? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, your mindset probably comes from your childhood environment and your parents and your family and your friends. So yeah, absolutely. Yep. And so the important thing to remember though is that no matter what kind of mindset we've grown up with, like I definitely had a fixed mindset for whatever reason. I don't think my parents were too kind of perfectionistic or anything, but for whatever reason, I've developed a fixed mindset, and luckily I've become aware of it and have been able to change it, I think, for the most part, to a growth mindset. And it's interesting, my daughter, so I guess to answer your question, I would guess that most of our mindset comes from our environment, but it's also part of our personality, I think. And the reason I say that is because, I have 2 daughters. I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they both have very different mindsets. My oldest daughter, Alexis, has a very fixed mindset. And the whole time that I've raised her, I've consciously tried to raise her to have a growth mindset. But it's like it didn't make a difference. She had a fixed mindset, and she still has a fixed mindset to this day. And my other daughter, Daniela, has much more of a growth mindset and is much more, able to take setbacks, and she's, for the most part, not always, but anyways, I think it's not just our environment, I guess is what I'm saying. I think it's probably both, but more importantly, we know now that we have control over our mindsets, and that's why this stuff is so important, because once you become aware of your mindsets, you can choose which mindset to operate from. And so that's why this is really important, because if you're in a situation and you're kind of going between the growth mindset and the fixed mindset, you can choose to kind of go into the growth mindset and operate from that mindset, which I think is really helpful. So Michael Jordan, I think, is a great example because even though he had that growth mindset, even though he was the greatest basketball player in the world, there were a couple times when he kind of fell into the fixed mindset. And he probably didn't have the, the benefit of knowing about the mindsets at this point, and that's why I think this is so important. But so it was 1992. Michael Jordan had led the Bulls to 3 championships at this point, and a really, terrible thing happened to him. His father was actually murdered in a robbery that went bad, and it was like a really random, tragic thing. Obviously, it devastated Michael Jordan, and he kind of, at this point, he was like at the height of his career in basketball, and he decided that he was going to honor his dad's memory, he was going to retire from basketball and become a professional baseball player. So he left basketball. Everybody was shocked. He went into baseball. He wasn't even good enough to get into the pros, so he went into the minor leagues. He played really hard there, and all his coaches and his teammates were really impressed with how hard he worked, and that he listened to feedback and criticism, and was willing to kind of learn from his mistakes. And he made it into the major leagues for 2 games. And I think, for him, that was great that he was able to play in the major leagues. And after a couple years, and after playing in the major leagues for 2 games, I think he realized, you know what, this isn't my cup of tea. I really want to go back to basketball. So he left baseball after a couple years, went back to basketball, and when he came back, he went back to the Bulls, and the Bulls had not done so well after he left. So everybody was really happy that he came back to the Bulls. And he thought he could kind of just come back and dominate the game like he did before. And so he really didn't practice that as hard as he had in the past, and he really didn't prepare as much as he did. And once he got back to the Bulls, they did pretty good that year, but they made it all the way to the playoffs, but then in the first round of the playoffs, they got eliminated. And so they interviewed Michael Jordan after the game, and everybody was shocked that they got eliminated. And he said, they asked him what happened out there, what was going on? And he said, you know what, I didn't prepare myself mentally, and I didn't prepare myself physically, but I'm not going to let that happen again. And so he went back out, the very next day, started training for the next season, came back the next season with the Bulls and led them to a championship that year, and then 2 more championships after that. So the reason I tell that story is because think about how John McEnroe responded to his failure at the mixed doubles tournament. His response was, I give up. I'm not going to do it again. I'm done. Michael Jordan's response to failure, even though I think probably the fixed mindset, that belief that he was talented and he didn't have to work that hard, that probably led to that failure, but he didn't let that failure stop him. He realized that the amount of work and effort he put in wasn't enough to get to the championships, but his work and his effort was under his control. So he, went back the next season, practiced harder, worked harder, and got the Bulls all the way, to a championship the following year. So that's why I love, that example of John McEnroe and Michael Jordan, because it really kind of illustrates how important a mindset is to our response to a bad situation or a failure or an obstacle. So why do mindsets matter? So this is kind of where mindsets comes from. This is some of the work that Carol Dweck did with students. And this shows that students, you could predict how well a student was going to do in math over the next couple of years just by knowing their mindset. And so people with a growth mindset, when they started off, they had the same GPA as people with the fixed mindset when they entered in the 7th grade. But after 2 years, the people with the growth mindset had a significantly higher GPA than those with the fixed mindset. And you could actually predict, it was the strongest predictor of math grades over the next 2 years was a student's mindset. So that's how our mindsets can affect us in school. And one of the most important studies that Carol Dweck did was a study that looked at, can we change our mindset? Like, okay, we know our mindsets and we know that they have a powerful effect on us, but the really important question is, can you teach someone to develop a growth mindset even if they start off with a fixed mindset? So in this experiment, she used 7th graders again, and in this experiment, one group was given study skills training, and that was all they were given was study skills. The second group was given study skills training and mindset training. So they were trained in how to develop a growth mindset. And you can see there, as time went on, their GPAs were going down, and then they had the mindset intervention right there in the middle. The experimental group, they were trained in the growth mindset, and they were able to increase their GPA after they learned about the mindsets. The group that didn't learn about the mindsets, they continued to earn lower grades. So this just showed that, even if you have a fixed mindset, if you learn about the growth mindset, you can change that mindset. Some other work that has really kind of, in the last few years, has really been a powerful illustration of how our mindsets affect us has been the work of Jason Mosier. And he actually looked at how our mindsets affect our brain. And so what he did was he had people hooked up to brain scanners, and they measured their mindset before this. So going into this experiment, they knew, what group of people had a fixed mindset and what group of people had a growth mindset. Then they put the brain scanners on them, and they put them in a situation where they had to do a really difficult task, and they were almost guaranteed to fail at this task. And the people with the growth mindset, there's a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. And that's the part of our brain that has to do with monitoring our behavior and monitoring our performance. And if you had a growth mindset and you made a mistake, that part of your brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, would light up. And so it was basically the people with the growth mindset saying, oh, wait a minute, I made a mistake here. How do I fix this? Or how do I learn from that mistake? Now, if you had a fixed mindset, though, and you made a mistake, that part of your brain didn't light up. So your mindset actually affected how your brain functioned. And so what that means is, when you change your mindset, you're actually changing how your brain functions. And so that's, I think, really neat. And also another important thing is that the stronger your growth mindset was, the more that part of your brain lit up, the stronger the signal was in your brain. And conversely, the stronger your fixed mindset was, the less that part of your brain lit up. So it actually was associated with the strength of the brain signal in that part of the brain that had to do with monitoring your performance. So really, kind of neat stuff. And it also kind of implies that when we change our mindsets, we're also changing how our brain functions. And so, like I said, the most important thing about all this stuff that we're talking about tonight is that we can change our mindset. We can choose which mindset to operate from. And there's a very kind of simple method that Carol Dweck has developed to help people, first of all, become aware of their mindsets, and then learn to kind of ensure that they keep a growth mindset. So the first step is just to kind of be aware of your mindsets. And so another term that people use when they talk about mindsets is self-talk or automatic messages. And so this is kind of like the internal dialogue that we have going on in our mind, in our head, whenever we go through as we're going through our day. It's like this constant self-talk that we have. And the messages that we tell ourselves actually are the messages that determine if we have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. So when you kind of catch yourself in a situation where something is difficult or you're having a hard time, just kind of pay attention to the messages that you give yourself and think about, is that a fixed mindset message or is that a growth mindset message? If it's a fixed mindset message, then that's where you have to kind of almost dispute yourself, get rid of that fixed mindset message and replace it with a growth mindset message. And then the next most important thing is to take action. So to actually put the growth mindset kind of into action and take some concrete action that will help you take advantage of that growth mindset. So I'll give you a couple examples of fixed mindset message and a growth mindset message. So let's say you're in a situation and you have just gotten a bad grade on a quiz or a bad grade on an essay. Let's say that. You got an essay in a class that you're taking and it was, let's say it was a D. So if you have a fixed mindset, you're going to think to yourself, it's no use. I'm just not good at this. I'm not cut out for it. All of those are fixed mindset messages. So we need to kind of catch ourselves and say, wait a minute, that's not necessarily true. Maybe it's just that I need to work harder, or I need to try a different strategy, or maybe I need to talk to the professor But there are some things that I can do to get better at this, to write a better essay next time. So those are the kind of messages that we give ourselves when we have a bad situation. And it's important to kind of realize that our interpretation of that event may not be the most helpful interpretation, and that there might be a better interpretation. So that's kind of an example of a fixed mindset message and how you can change that to a growth mindset message. And so kind of the next most important step, though, it's important to be aware of your mindset, and it's important to kind of make sure that you're in a growth mindset. But if you don't take the action, put that into practice, you're really not going to benefit from that. So we're running out of time, and so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and talk about why the growth mindset is so important. So that brings us back to this slide here. So some people answered at the beginning. So what do we think the answer is? A, B, C, or D? When does the brain stop growing? Okay. I'm sorry. You know what? Okay, I missed. I've been waiting for answers, and my chat thing was too far up. Okay, so actually, all right. So I see some of the answers, and actually, Katia, you are correct. It's none of the answers. This is actually a trick question, and so this is also kind of like it's a reflection of our knowledge about the brain over the last 30 years. So 30 years ago, we actually thought that A was the correct answer. Scientists and educators, neuroscientists, thought that once you were 3 years old, your brain was done growing. Then about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, they realized, you know what, we were wrong. It's not when you're 3 years old. It's actually when you're 23. But once you're 23, your IQ, your personality, your intelligence, all that stuff is done, and your brain's done growing. Now we know that actually people well into their 80s, when they learn a new skill, they're actually changing their brain, and that neurons never actually stop growing. And they call this neurogenesis. And people well into their 80s continue to grow neurons, which is something that has really kind of shocked scientists. But we know now that the brain, it may slow down as you get older, like in your 80s, but the process actually never stops. Right, I know. It's kind of a tricky question. I know. I apologize. But anyways, this is why, the growth mindset is so powerful, because we can either work with our biology, with our brains, and kind of take advantage of that, or with a growth mindset, or we can kind of work against our biology by having a fixed mindset and kind of, hold ourselves back kind of against our own, natural kind of strengths that we have. So that's why the growth mindset is so important. And there is a ton of stuff out there. I shared with you guys some stuff tonight. I shared the presentation that I gave you guys tonight, and there's a bunch of articles at the end of the presentation and some really great books. There's actually a really good book called The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Dodge, and they actually talk a lot in there about some of the new research that's shown just how much the brain can change and how much we influence the development of our brain, and how that process never stops. So there's some really good stuff out there, really great articles, and it's one of those things where it's really caught on in psychology, and there are a lot of people who are doing work on this now. And actually, if you go on YouTube, there's some really great YouTube lectures on mindsets, and so there's a wealth of information, and we kind of just scratched the surface tonight, but if this stuff sounds like it is helpful, then what I would encourage you to do is really pay attention to the kinds of messages that you tell yourself when you're in a situation where something is difficult. And those messages are going to give you kind of a hint at what kind of mindset you have. And then, you know, the next step is to make sure that if they're fixed mindset messages, you want to replace those with the more growth mindset messages. And then, like I said earlier, you know, put that stuff into action. Don't just change your mind. Actually, put the growth mindset into action. So I think we're out of time. So I'm going to give people a chance if they have questions or comments. But by all means, you know, you can contact me either through email or through the phone. I think my phone's out there, but if not, you can email me and I can, you know, we can talk about it more. But any questions or comments about tonight's workshop? And you can either type it or say it in your microphone. Okay, you're welcome. I hope it was helpful. Thanks, John. Okay, Katia. Yeah, and we'll send out a recording. It might be a couple days because we have to process the video. So, okay, you're welcome, everybody. Good, I'm glad. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Good night, Katia. And if you have questions or anything, I'm definitely, you know, happy to hopefully answer them. Okay, good night.
Okay. Good night, Dan. I was hitting the recording off.